I felt it, she said simply. When you touched me. Names are powerful things, are they not? They define us, anchor us. But here, in this moment, you are more than your name. You are you. The story begins on a quiet evening by the shimmering surface of Lake Coron, an isolated stretch of water rumored to hold secrets beyond human understanding. Jake, an ordinary guy with a knack for finding himself in peculiar situations, was taking a peaceful walk along the shore. As the sun dipped low, casting an orange glow across the lake, his gaze caught something unusual, an elegant figure thrashing in the water. Instincts kicked in, and Jake leaped into action, diving headfirst into the icy depths. What he pulled out wasn't just any girl, it was an alien, her silver skin glowing faintly, her iridescent hair clinging to her face, and her large, luminescent eyes wide with shock. She coughed up water, clinging to him like he was her last hope. Her body trembled, and Jake couldn't help but notice how strangely soft her touch was, her fingers curling around his arm, as if she'd never felt anything quite like human warmth before. Jake carried her to the shore, his heart pounding not just from the exertion but from the sheer surrealism of the moment. Up close, her features were even more captivating. Her lips moved, but the sounds were alien, melodic yet incomprehensible. As she steadied her breathing, her gaze locked onto his, intense and filled with gratitude or something more. She reached out, placing a hand on his chest, her touch lingering as if she were trying to communicate through it. Jake, trying to make sense of the situation, joked nervously, if you were trying to swim, you're doing it all wrong. To his surprise, her lips curled into what seemed like a smile, her sharp teeth glinting briefly. Her eyes traveled over him, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that she was analyzing him, not just externally but something deeper, as if she was learning him on a level he couldn't comprehend. Luke wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he didn't. Instead, he let himself focus on the connection between them, the strange and wonderful way her presence seemed to fill every part of him. He could feel her curiosity, her desire to understand, and something else, something deeper, more profound. As the moments passed, the alien girl began to emit a low hum, almost like a purr, and her skin glowed brighter. Jake, still soaked and shivering, couldn't help but wonder what exactly he'd gotten himself into. She suddenly pressed closer to him, her movements slow and deliberate, her body warmer now as if the cold lake hadn't affected her at all. Jake chuckled nervously, his mind racing. Personal space? Do you guys not have that where you're from? Her head tilted as if she was trying to decipher his words, and then, without warning, she leaned forward and sniffed him. Jake froze. Okay, this is getting interesting, he muttered, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Her hum deepened, and she touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw with an unsettling familiarity. As they continued to explore each other, the jungle around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, locked in this strange, beautiful dance. Luke had no idea where this was going, but for the first time in a long time he didn't care. All that mattered was Ailira, and the connection they were forging together. Luke's heartbeat seemed to sync with the rhythmic pulses of Ailira's form, an unspoken rhythm that bound them together in ways he couldn't have imagined. Her liquid curves shifted again, pressing against him with a playfulness that made his breath catch. She wasn't just exploring him, she was learning, adapting, teasing. Every ripple, every warm caress seemed designed to provoke a reaction, and Luke couldn't help but respond. Ailira's form rippled with a soft, glowing light, a signal of contentment Luke had come to recognize. Every moment with her felt like stepping into a dream, one where the boundaries of reality blurred and the impossible became tangible. But even dreams had to face the dawn, and Luke could feel something shifting in the air, a subtle change he couldn't ignore. Before Jake could fully process what was happening, she started speaking in halting English, each word deliberate. "You saved me. You." Special, her voice was musical yet commanding, and the way she emphasized special sent a shiver down Jake's spine. He tried to lighten the mood. "Well, I'd say anyone would have done it, but I guess I was in the right place at the right time." She shook her head, her expression serious now. "No, not anyone. You. Different." Her gaze seemed to pierce through him, making him feel exposed in a way he wasn't used to. She leaned in closer, her face inches from his, and whispered, "I owe you." Reward? Jake's heart skipped a beat. Reward? That's, not necessary, really, but the alien girl didn't seem to agree. Her hand slid to his chest again, this time pressing firmly as if marking him somehow. "Our way. Must. Give back," she said, her voice dripping with an intensity that left no room for argument. Jake tried to diffuse the tension with humor. "Look, if your idea of a reward is doing that glowy thing, consider it enough. Really, it's very shiny." She didn't laugh, or maybe she didn't understand. Instead, her glow intensified, enveloping them both in a soft light. Jake felt a warmth spread through him, not just physical but something deeper, almost intimate. Her voice softened as she murmured, "You saved life. I give you connection." Jake blinked, confused. Connection? What does that mean? Her smile returned, mischievous this time, as if she enjoyed his confusion. "You." Feel soon her fingers trailed down his arm, leaving a tingling sensation in their wake. Jake was pretty sure she was messing with him now, and he wasn't entirely sure he minded. "Okay, this is either the weirdest or the best thing that's ever happened to me," he muttered, half to himself. "You're quiet again," Aelira said, her voice brushing against his thoughts like a caress. "What's on your mind, human?" Luke hesitated, his hand resting against her warm, fluid surface. "I was just thinking, what happens now? I mean, this connection we have, it's incredible, but it's also fragile." The alien girl seemed to find his bewilderment amusing. She tilted her head, her glow dimming slightly as if she were calming down. "You, kind, brave." Different, her words were simple, but the way she said them carried weight. Jake felt his cheeks heat up, not from embarrassment, but from the intensity of her attention. "Well, I try," he said, scratching the back of his head. She stepped closer again, her movements graceful but deliberate, and Jake couldn't help but notice how her proximity made his pulse quicken. "Teach me," she said suddenly, her eyes locking onto his with an almost predatory focus. Jake gulped. "Teach you what?" Her lips curved into that mischievous smile again. "Your ways." Fragile Aelira's voice carried a hint of amusement. "I would argue the opposite. What we share is unlike anything I've ever known, Luke. It's strong, enduring. But you're worried, aren't you?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "My ways? You mean human ways?" "That's kind of a broad topic," she nodded, her expression earnest now. "Need learn. You, best teacher." Jake couldn't tell if she was being sincere, or if she was just messing with him in that alien way of hers, but either way, he was intrigued. "All right," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Lesson 1: humans appreciate a little personal space." "Let's start there." She tilted her head, clearly not understanding, and instead stepped even closer, her glow brightening again. Jake sighed, realizing this was going to be more challenging and probably more interesting than he'd anticipated, as the alien girl watched him with those glowing eyes. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to get a lot more complicated and a lot more exciting. He nodded, letting out a sigh. "Yeah, I guess I am. This isn't exactly a normal situation, you know. I'm from Earth, you're. And while this feels right, it's not exactly sustainable in the long term." Jake had barely finished speaking when the alien girl pressed closer to him, her presence overwhelming. The air between them seemed to thrum with an unspoken energy, and Jake, still stunned by the surreal situation, found himself wondering if this was really happening. She reached up, her fingers gently brushing his neck as she explored the contours of his skin, her touch sending strange shivers down his spine. "You're ... warm," she murmured, almost in awe. Her eyes searched his, as if she were trying to understand something beyond the physical. "I've never felt this before." Her form shifted, a gentle embrace that surrounded him like a comforting blanket. "Why must you humans always think in terms of permanence? Can't you simply enjoy what is without worrying about what might be?" Jake swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. Yeah, humans are warm-blooded. It's kind of our thing." He wanted to laugh, to break the tension, but there was something about the way she looked at him that made it impossible. It was like she was both learning and testing him in some strange cosmic way. The idea of teaching her human ways suddenly felt less like a joke and more like a very real possibility. Luke chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's just how we're wired, I guess. We like to plan ahead, think about the future. It's part of what makes us human." "Your warmth," she repeated, her voice taking on a softer tone. "I want to learn it, feel it all." Her lips were dangerously close to his ear now, and Jake could feel his heartbeat quicken, a mix of excitement and confusion swirling in his chest. He tried to keep his composure, even as she pulled back slightly, her eyes never leaving his. Aelia hummed thoughtfully, her warmth pulsing against him. Then perhaps it's my role to teach you to live in the moment, to savor what we have here and now without the weight of expectation. Teach me how you connect, she said, her voice low and serious now. It was as if everything else had faded away, and the two of them were the only things in the universe. Jake couldn't help but wonder if he was getting more than he bargained for. Well, connecting with humans isn't exactly like your kind of connection. He wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't that simple, but her words resonated with a truth he couldn't deny. She was right. They had something extraordinary, something that defied logic and reason. And maybe that was enough. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was trying to understand the meaning behind his words. Not like mine. But you saved me. We are already connected. She leaned forward again, brushing her lips lightly against his cheek. The sudden tenderness of her touch left Jake speechless, and his mind raced, wondering how to respond. The glow from her skin had faded a little, but the intensity in her gaze was as strong as ever. "Okay, I see your point," Jake muttered, his voice growing thick with uncertainty. "But I think we need to slow down here." "All right," he tried to step back, but she followed him, closing the space between them with an unrelenting purpose. Her eyes flickered with amusement, clearly understanding more than she let on. "You're something else, you know that," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Something else," she repeated, her tone light. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You are." "Unsure," she said, almost teasingly. "I do not." "Scare you?" Jake tried to force a laugh, but it came out more like a nervous chuckle. No, you're not scary," he said quickly, though his body felt tense, as if every nerve was alert. This is all new to me. It's not every day you pull a drowning alien out of a lake." As they shared a quiet laugh, the shifting air around them grew more pronounced, a faint hum vibrating through the room. Aelia stilled, her form tightening slightly as if sensing something Luke couldn't. Her smile was slow, deliberate. "I am no ordinary alien." She leaned in closer, pressing her forehead to his. "I understand you more than you think. And you want to understand me." Yes, her voice was softer now, like a whisper carried by the wind. It was hard to tell if she was asking a question or stating a fact. Jake blinked, trying to steady his racing thoughts. "I don't even know your name," he blurted out, desperately searching for something to ground the conversation. Her lips parted in surprise before her smile returned, more knowing this time. "I am Zara. But names are not important. I wish to learn more." "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing. She took another step forward, her body pressing into his as if to emphasize her point. The warmth radiating from her was intoxicating, making it harder for Jake to think clearly. He took a deep breath, trying to push away the growing desire to just give in to the pull between them. "Okay, Zara," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But this isn't how humans usually do things. You've got to understand that." "There's a present," she said, her voice tinged with unease. "Another signal. It's faint, but it's there." Her eyes flashed, and she tilted her head, clearly intrigued by his resistance. "Why? Is this not what you want?" She took a slow step back, eyeing him carefully. "Do you not desire connection as well?" Luke glanced around the room, his heart pounding. "A signal, like another of your kind." Jake struggled to respond, his mind a blur of emotions. Was she teasing him? Or was she genuinely trying to understand what it meant to be human? And if she was, how much was he willing to give her? There was something undeniably magnetic about her, a force that made him feel both vulnerable and alive. I mean, yes, Jake admitted, his voice barely a whisper, but not like this, not all at once. "Possibly," she said, her glow dimming slightly. "Or something else entirely. I can't be certain." Before he could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room, followed by a holographic display flickering to life in the corner. It was the ship's communication system, its interface glowing with an incoming transmission. Zara's gaze softened, and for a moment she seemed to understand. Her hand moved to his chest once more, but this time it was different. She gently traced the outline of his shirt, as if she were feeling the pulse beneath his skin. "Slow," she said, her tone barely audible. "I will learn slowly." Jake let out a long breath, his shoulders relaxing a bit. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to navigate this strange situation without getting completely swept up in it. "All right," he said, his voice steadier now. "We can start slow. But you've got to tell me more about yourself, like, where do you come from? What do you need? Why are you here?" Luke Caldwell, a voice crackled through the speakers, sharp and authoritative. "This is Commander Rhea of the Galactic Coalition. We've detected unauthorized alien activity aboard your vessel. Prepare for boarding." Her lips curled into a playful smile. "I come from beyond your world. My people. We are explorers. We seek knowledge, and I wanted to understand humans." She took another step back, her eyes shining with curiosity. "You are much more complicated than I thought. Your emotions, your desires, I do not understand them." Luke's stomach dropped, and he exchanged a quick glance with Aelira. "They found us," he whispered. Aelira's form pulsed with agitation, her curves shifting in restless waves. "What do they want?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, that makes two of us." He couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Here he was, a regular guy, trying to teach an alien about human emotions, all while fighting off his own desires. He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing, but something about the situation made him feel like he couldn't turn back now. "I will learn," Zara said again, her voice filled with determination. "But I need your help, Jake. Your warmth, your way of connecting. You are my teacher, and I am your student. Show me." "Probably to take you," he said, his voice grim. "The Coalition doesn't exactly have a great track record with, well, beings like you." She narrowed her glowing eyes, her voice hardening. "They'll have to get through me first." Luke couldn't help but grin despite the tension. "That's the spirit. But we need a plan." The hum of the Coalition ship docking with his own grew louder, the vibrations rattling through the walls. Luke moved quickly, grabbing his personal data pad and typing in a series of commands. "I'm setting the ship to overload its systems. If they try to board, they won't have much time to take anything before the whole thing fries." "And us?" Aelira asked, her voice calm despite the urgency. "We'll take the escape pod," he said, gesturing toward the small hatch at the far end of the room. "It's cramped, but it'll get us out of here." Aelira nodded, her form compacting slightly as if preparing for the journey. "Then let's move." They sprinted toward the escape pod as the sound of boots echoed through the ship. Luke could hear the Coalition team moving quickly, their voices sharp and commanding. He shoved open the pod's hatch and climbed inside, Aelira flowing in after him. The pod's interior was as tight as he'd expected, but Aelira adjusted seamlessly, her form wrapping around him like a protective cocoon. He slammed the hatch shut and activated the launch sequence, his fingers flying over the controls. "Brace yourself," he muttered as the pod lurched violently, shooting away from the ship just as a bright flash lit up the viewport. The overload sequence had worked, the ship exploding in a brilliant burst of light and debris. As the pod hurtled through space, silence settled over them, broken only by the soft hum of the pod's life support systems. Luke let out a shaky breath, leaning back against the wall. "We made it," he said, relief washing over him. "For now," Aelira replied, her voice soft. "But the Coalition won't stop. They'll keep searching." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll keep running, together." Her form pulsed with a gentle warmth, a silent agreement that filled him with a strange sense of hope. They might be on the run, but they had each other. And as long as they did, he knew they'd find a way to survive. "You're not alone anymore, Luke Caldwell," she said, her voice firm but tender. "We'll face whatever comes next, together." He smiled, his hand resting against her glowing form. "Together," he echoed, the word carrying a weight that felt both comforting and resolute. As the pod drifted into the endless expanse of space, their bond remained unbroken, a beacon of light in the vast darkness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, their connection stronger than any force that dared to tear them apart. "You're quiet now," Aelira said, her voice sliding into his thoughts like silk. Is the fearless explorer at a loss for words? Luke chuckled, the sound shaky but genuine. "I'm just taking it all in. You're kind of a lot, you know." Her laughter shimmered through him, a gentle vibration that made his skin tingle. "A lot? I'll take that as a compliment. But tell me, human, what is it you're feeling right now?" I want to understand everything, every little detail." He hesitated, searching for the right words. How could he possibly describe what was happening? It's like, you're everywhere at once. Inside, outside, in my head. It's overwhelming, but not in a bad way. More like, I didn't know I needed this until it happened. Ailira hummed in approval, her form tightening around him just enough to make his pulse quicken. Fascinating. Your kind seems to thrive on sensation. Every touch, every sound, even the unspoken. It drives you. You're so alive, Luke. It's intoxicating. Flattering me now, are you? He quipped, his smirk returning despite the heat in his cheeks. Perhaps, she admitted, her tone playful. But it's not flattery if it's true. Isn't that what you said? Her form rippled again, brushing against his chest, his arms, his legs, leaving trails of warmth in her wake. I can feel your heartbeat, your breath, even the tension you try to hide. You're an open book to me, Luke Caldwell. That's not exactly fair, he said, his voice low. I can't read you the same way. Can't you? She countered, her tone dipping into something almost sultry. What do you feel when I do this? Her form shifted abruptly, a gentle but firm pressure that made him gasp. Or this another shift, softer this time, like a whisper against his skin. Luke bit back a groan, his hands curling into fists. Okay, point taken. You're in control here. Control, Ailira repeated, her voice amused. Is that what you think this is about? No, human. This isn't about control. It's about connection. You and I. We're merging in ways your kind has never experienced before. Isn't that what you wanted? He couldn't argue with that, not when every fiber of his being was screaming at him to lean into whatever this was. I didn't expect it to be like this, he admitted. So, intense. Intensity is what makes life worth living, isn't it? Ailira's form shifted again, this time pulling back slightly, giving him just enough space to catch his breath. But I can ease up if you'd like. I wouldn't want to overwhelm my favorite human. Favorite? Ha, he said, raising an eyebrow. How many humans have you met, exactly? She laughed, a soft, melodic sound that sent shivers down his spine. Just you. But that makes you special, doesn't it? Luke couldn't help but smile at her playful tone. I guess it does. But if I'm the first, does that mean you're just winging this? Figuring it out as you go? Isn't that what your kind calls living? She shot back, her voice filled with mischief. Trial and error, experimentation, discovery. I'm merely following your lead, Luke. Well, if you're following my lead, I should warn you humans are notoriously unpredictable. Good, she said, her tone almost daring. I like unpredictability. Show me more. Luke hesitated for only a moment before he reached out again, his hands pressing against her shimmering form. This time he let himself relax, letting go of the tension he hadn't realized he was holding. Ailira responded instantly, her warmth enveloping him once more, her movements fluid and eager. Jake hesitated. The air between them felt charged, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to teach Zara everything she wanted to know about human connection. But as he looked into her luminous eyes, something told him that the lesson would be anything but ordinary. Jake stood there, caught between the desire to understand what Zara was asking of him and the uncertainty of where this could lead. Her gaze was so intense, almost like she was reading him, understanding him in a way that was far beyond his comprehension. He wasn't sure if it was her alien nature, the alien warmth of her skin, or just the way she seemed so utterly confident that made him feel like he was the one being tested. So, you really don't know how human connections work, he asked, still trying to make sense of it. He was being careful, unsure how much he should reveal. This wasn't like anything he had ever experienced, and the idea of explaining intimacy or emotions to an alien felt surreal. I mean, there are emotions involved. There's more to us than just the physical stuff. It's about trust and respect. You can't just dive into it without understanding those things. Zara's eyes softened, her head tilting as she processed his words. Trust. Respect, she repeated them as if tasting them, running them through her mind. I see. I thought it was just about feeling, but you say it's more. She reached out slowly, her hand hovering in the air between them, as if seeking permission. Jake could almost feel the weight of her curiosity, the tension of her presence overwhelming yet strangely inviting. Yeah, it's more, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. He had no idea what he was doing, but he didn't want to lose her interest either. It's not just the physical touch. It's the connection that happens in your heart, you know. He realized how awkward it sounded but couldn't stop himself from continuing. You need to feel for someone, not just with them. She nodded slowly, the light in her eyes flickering with a quiet understanding. And this connection, it happens naturally between humans, she asked, her voice low, as if she was treading carefully, not forced. She took a small step toward him, the air between them growing warmer, and Jake could feel his heart race. She was standing so close now that her scent, an intoxicating blend of something alien and sweet, seemed to cloud his thoughts. Yeah, Jake said, his throat dry. It happens when you trust someone. When you feel safe with them, you know. He wasn't sure if he was explaining this right. Was this even the kind of conversation a human should be having with an alien? He wasn't sure, but somehow it felt important that she understood. That she felt it. Her eyes never left his, a strange depth in them that he couldn't quite place. She seemed to be studying him carefully, as if he was some sort of puzzle to be solved. I trust you, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. I feel safe with you, and just like that, the words hit Jake like a jolt of electricity. He didn't know if it was the sincerity in her voice or the sudden closeness of her body that made it so intense, but he found himself at a loss for words. Zara, Jake began, but before he could finish, she stepped even closer. Her hand reached out again, this time touching his chest, and it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Her fingers were so light, almost delicate, as they traced the contours of his shirt. Her touch sent an unexpected thrill through him, something both foreign and familiar at the same time. It made his pulse race. You teach me, Jake, she murmured, her breath warm against his skin. Teach me what it means to truly connect, what it means to be human. I want to learn. With you. The words hung in the air like a promise, a plea, and Jake wasn't sure whether he was in control anymore. It was like he was caught in a storm of emotions and desires, all of which seemed to swirl around her. The gravity of the situation, her alien presence, her trust in him, and the way she looked at him was more than he could handle. His heart pounded, a mix of excitement and something else. Jake's mind was racing, unsure of how to proceed. He'd always been the kind of guy to take things slow, but with Zara, everything was happening at once. The alien girl who had been saved from drowning now stood before him, asking him to teach her the depths of human connection. It was overwhelming. He didn't know what to say or how to act, but her presence seemed to demand a response. Zara's touch was gentle but insistent. Every time she moved closer, it felt as if the air thickened with tension. She was different from any woman he'd ever met. Her gaze held a mix of curiosity and determination, like she was set on learning whatever she could from him. And, to be honest, Jake wasn't sure if he was ready for this. It felt too intense, too fast, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. It was like an invisible force, drawing him in. Zara, this isn't going to be easy, Jake said, his voice shaky but firm. You don't just learn how to connect with someone overnight. You have to trust, you have to understand their feelings. It's not something you can rush. Zara tilted her head, as if considering his words. Her dark eyes never left his face. I trust you, Jake, she said softly. I felt it the moment you reached out to me. You saved me. I owe you. And now, I want to understand you. I want to understand how humans connect. Jake swallowed hard. He couldn't believe this was happening. Here was this alien, asking him to teach her about human emotions and connections. It was surreal, and yet, the sincerity in her voice made him want to try. He wanted to show her, to teach her. But could he do it right? Could he really explain something as complicated as human emotion to someone who had never experienced it before? He took a deep breath. All right, let's start slow. First, you need to understand that human connection isn't just physical. It's about shared experiences, vulnerability, and trust. You have to let someone in. Zara stepped closer, her eyes fixed on him as she listened carefully. Let them in, she repeated, trying to grasp the concept. She was so focused, so intent on learning. It was almost like she was absorbing every word he spoke. Yeah, Jake said, nodding. You have to trust that they won't hurt you, and that they'll be there for you when you need them. Zara's expression softened, her gaze flicking down to the ground for a moment before she looked back up at him. I trust you, Jake, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know how to respond to that. Part of him wanted to pull back, to keep a safe distance, but another part of him felt this strange sense of connection with her. She was an alien, someone from another world, yet in this moment she seemed so human. Before he could say anything, Zara reached out again, this time placing her hand on his chest. The warmth of her touch sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just physical warmth, it was something deeper, something that made him feel like she was reaching for his soul. "You're teaching me, Jake," she said softly. "And I'm learning, slowly. But I'm learning." Her words hung in the air between them. Jake didn't know what to say. He could feel her trust, her desire to learn, and it made him feel both honored and terrified at the same time. This wasn't something he had ever signed up for, but in a way, it felt like destiny. Could he really teach her? Could he explain everything about human connection? Zara stepped closer, the space between them shrinking with every passing second. The tension in the air was palpable now, and Jake couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. She was standing so close that he could feel the heat radiating off her body. His heart was pounding in his chest. He had never been this close to someone, not like this, and with an alien, it was both exhilarating and terrifying. "You want to learn, right?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara nodded, her hand still resting on his chest. "Yes, Jake. I want to understand. I want to feel what you feel. I want to learn to connect, to be more than just." This she gestured between them, her expression filled with both longing and curiosity. Jake felt a rush of emotions. Part of him wanted to give in, to let the connection between them grow. But another part of him hesitated. This was all so new, so unexpected. Could he really teach her? Could he show her what it meant to be human? "You have to understand," Jake said, his voice trembling slightly. "Human connection is not just about physical touch. It's about being there for someone, sharing your thoughts and feelings, opening up to them. You can't force it, and you can't expect it to happen overnight. It takes time." Zara's eyes softened as she listened intently. She was absorbing every word he said, trying to understand the intricacies of human emotions. Time she repeated, "I understand. It's not immediate. It's something that grows, slowly." Jake nodded. "Exactly. It's about building trust, respecting each other, and sharing your vulnerability. You don't just give yourself to someone, it's about mutual understanding." For a moment, Zara was silent, her gaze intense as she seemed to be contemplating his words. Then, without warning, she stepped even closer, her breath brushing against his lips. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He could feel her presence in every part of his being now, the connection between them so strong that it was almost overwhelming. "Jake," she whispered, her voice low and enticing, "teach me." And in that moment, something inside Jake shifted. He had been hesitant, unsure of what this would all mean. But as Zara stood there, trusting him completely, he realized that this wasn't just about teaching her. It was about learning from each other. It was about understanding what it meant to be human and what it meant to connect, truly connect, with another being. With a deep breath, Jake closed the distance between them, his hands gently cupping her face. Her eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into his touch, a soft sigh escaping her lips. And for the first time, Jake realized that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to teach her, and to show her what it meant to connect. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. This was only the beginning. There was so much more to learn, and Jake knew, deep down, that the connection between them would continue to grow. They had both taken the first step, and now, together, they would navigate the uncharted waters of human and alien connection. The end? No, this was only the beginning. "Zara," he said, swallowing hard. He was trying to think, to process the situation, but she had completely disarmed him. His mind was fuzzy, and for a second he just wanted to give in. But something inside told him to hold back. Not everything could be rushed. Zara seemed to sense his hesitation and took a step back, giving him space but never breaking eye contact. "What is it that you fear?" Jake, she asked, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You fear this connection? Or are you afraid that I will understand you better than you understand yourself?" Jake was taken aback by her insight. He didn't know whether to be impressed or unnerved by how well she seemed to read him. "It's not fear," he said slowly, still trying to make sense of everything. This is all so new. I don't know if I'm ready to explain everything to you. I don't know how to teach you what it means to truly connect." Zara's smile deepened, and she moved a little closer once more, her body language calm but insistent. I will learn, she said softly, her fingers grazing his arm as she spoke. I will learn, Jake. You will teach me. There was a certain finality in her voice that left no room for argument, and in that moment Jake realized she wasn't going to back down. Her touch, now light but certain, sent a shiver through him. It was almost as if her skin was charged with energy. Every time she moved, it felt like the world tilted slightly in her direction. But somehow, despite the intense pull between them, Jake managed to keep his ground. "All right, Zara," he said, his voice a little rough. "I'll teach you. But you've got to understand this is not going to be simple. There's a lot to human connection. It's not just about feeling good." Zara nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly in thought. "I understand. It is more than just the sensation. It is deeper, like a bond that grows with time. I can learn, Jake." Show me. She reached for him again, this time more deliberately, her fingers tracing the edge of his jawline. There was an almost playful glint in her eyes, as if she were daring him to continue the lesson. Jake stood there, caught between wanting to step back and the overwhelming urge to lean into her touch. Every inch of his body screamed at him to give in, to let her learn, to explore the strange, dangerous new world that had opened up between them. But deep down, he knew this was going to be a journey unlike anything he had ever expected. And somehow he felt that the ride had only just begun.